Hey everybody, it's Jason Blah here, and I'm just sitting here drinking my morning coffee, getting ready to get my squat on. And got a hook grip on my cup because hook grip on every rep. All right, guys, something I want to talk with you guys about today. This is something I cover every now and then, but I think it's really important that people need to understand, and that is that it is not a good idea to ever do touch and go reps on the deadlift. And what I mean by touch and go is where you just tap the weight on the floor. You tap the weight on the floor and you keep doing reps instead of doing a full reset to where you let the bar touch the floor for a full second and redo your setup. In fact, I could argue that if you need to, you should even re-grip the bar, readjust everything, even reset your feet if you need to on every single rep on the deadlift. Now, the difference we see here is that some people, though, they're doing like a Romanian deadlift where they touch it on the floor and they're kind of getting a similar training response to a Romanian deadlift. But we would also argue that's not even a good idea to do that. If you're going to do a Romanian deadlift to get that stretch reflex, you shouldn't need to touch the floor. You should be stopping a couple inches short of the floor. Now, the reason I say that is that, number one, very high injury rate. That is how the majority of people get hurt deadlifting, not bicep tears. Bicep tears happen also. That's caused for different reasons. But when you see people who hurt their back on the deadlift, in my experience, the overwhelming majority of people who either strain a back muscle on their deadlift or they herniate a disc deadlifting are people who tap the floor instead of doing a full reset, right? In fact, I would classify it as bad form. Now, a lot of people are going to give their excuses why, and you'll see some champions and other people do it, and then people say, well, this guy does it, that guy does it, what's wrong with it? Well, what I would point out to people, just because a champion does something doesn't mean it's not going to get you hurt. It doesn't mean it's not going to get them hurt. It doesn't mean they're getting a benefit from it. Because let's say you have some guy who does 700 pounds for 5 reps, right? And he taps the last 4. Well, he still did a 1 deadlift in there. And he still get a training response from the others. And again, a lot of people would say, well, I can lift more weight and I have continual tension there that way. Well, you don't have continual tension because you tap the floor and you have a split second to where you have no tension anymore. And number 2, continual tension has never been found in any of the data to actually stimulate muscle growth, meaning that's a bodybuilding method. It's not actually based on anything found in a lab. And if you were to ask an exercise physiologist who this is their profession to study this stuff, they'll usually look at you and go, why would you think that? There's no actual biological reason to think that continual tension on a muscle actually matters for muscle growth. It's not even a factor. There's no reason to believe that, let alone to actually have studies to back it. There's no actual logical reason why. Like, there's nothing that happens in the body that would even suggest that's the case. There's no need to even study it, they would argue. And it has been studied and hasn't, to my knowledge, it hasn't been found to have a benefit, but they would argue, why would you even need to study this? There's no reason to believe it's true anyways, based upon the way the body works. So again, we're dealing with stuff that's so far into bro science that even the researchers would laugh and be like, why would you even waste time with that? It's silly. So people will do it for continual tension, and then they'll say, I get more workload, more overload. Well, here's what I would point out to people. People say silly things like, I'm doing something to get more work out of a muscle. And you got to look at people and go, do you really think you can get more work out of a muscle than reaching muscle failure? You know, it's these weird ideas that people have that if they do something that allows them to lift more weight for some magical reason, even if it's by making it easier or some way to again, you reduce weight on the bar, you cheat the weight up, you do something like, I'm overloading muscle more. No, you're not. In other words, your hamstrings, your spinal erectors, all of these muscles, your glutes, they can only do so much work before all of your upper threshold muscle fibers are exhausted and they stop working. You don't work the muscle any harder by finding some way to extend the set with the same amount of weight. So in other words, when you start doing partials and trimming range of motion, you're not working the muscle harder. Yeah, you could do more reps or you can lift more weight if you skip the hardest part of an exercise, but you're doing it because you're skipping the hardest part of the exercise. That's why you're able to do it. So some common sense should dictate, well, wait a minute, if I'm able to do more because I skipped the hardest part of the exercise, doesn't that mean I'm not working as hard? The muscles aren't doing as much work? That would be the correct answer. So when you think about it from a deadlift, what's the hardest part of a deadlift? Usually breaking it off the floor. It's called a deadlift for a reason. So what you find is that oftentimes people can do 95% of their 1 rep max sometimes for 3, 4, 5, 6 reps by bouncing it off the floor and doing these touch and go reps, right? So they think they're doing more work because that's a weight that at best they might be only able to do 2 times. In other words, if they were to actually deadlift it twice, they probably couldn't get it off the floor on a 3rd rep, but if they do touch and go, they can do 5 reps, they can do 6 reps. So in their mind, hey, look at all the extra work I can do. Not really, because you're skipping the hard part. You're skipping the hard part. Sure, you're still stimulating muscles. Yes, your deadlift might improve from doing that. Do you know why? Because you're working the muscles still. And anytime you work the primary movers in an exercise, there's the potential to get stronger on the exercise because the primary movers are going to hypertrophy, they're going to adapt, they're going to grow. So there's potential there, but it's not any better than if you had done real deadlift reps. You're not actually doing more work at the muscle level. You're able to do more physical work with the barbell because you're making it easier. You're making it easier, so therefore you can do more reps. But those reps are not the same. In other words, those extra 4 reps that you're getting by tapping it off the floor, your muscles are not doing more work than they would have had you only been able to do 2 reps with that 2nd rep. They're not doing more work than that. Because that 2nd rep is pretty much all you have. You've reached pretty much muscle failure in those primary movers. And if your goal was to say, well, I'm not trying to get my glutes and hamstrings, whatever, then you would do a different exercise. If you're thinking you're going to do it just for more tension on the upper back by more reps, there's better exercises than wasting your recovery on a deadlift to do that. You could be doing, some power snatches or some snatch grip high pulls or whatever and get all of those muscles that you're trying to work in the upper back without the recovery issues associated with doing more heavy deadlifts, because you're getting a lot of extra axial loading. It's harder to recover from. This is not helping you in that regard. Also, you're not really training the deadlift, and that's what I would say to people. The deadlift is very, very taxing on your recovery. And it has to do with the amount of weight compressing on your spine. You're going to get the most training effect with the least amount of axial loading if you just do every rep off the floor with a full reset, because you're still fatiguing those muscles a lot more with each of those reps, right? You're fatiguing the muscles involved in the movement more with every rep if you reset, but you do less reps with the same amount of weight. Or you have to do slightly less weight with the same number of reps, because again, you've got to reset every time, and guess what? There's less total compressive and shearing stress being put upon the spine. Therefore, there's less problems to recover from. You will recover easier from that. And guys, remember, volume deadlifting is absurdly hard to recover from. You don't need to do things to make it more difficult. And that's kind of the point you get to. You'll see the guys who do these ultra heavy touch and go and everything else. You got to remember, these are guys who are usually on a lot of drugs to help them recover. But they would still recover easier if they didn't do that, if they went ahead and did full resets. Furthermore, if we want to talk about deadlifting to get better at the deadlift, if you just trying to hypertrophy the muscles involved in a deadlift, there are, again, plenty of easier to recover from accessory movements to do that. When you touch and go, you're also not training the motor pattern involved with the deadlift. And if you want to get better at a lift, the best thing you can do is to train the motor pattern to get good at that lift. Well, if you're doing a 5-rep set, the only actual real deadlift you did that looks anything like your deadlift was the first rep, if you're just doing a touch and go, because your bar path is different, your strength curve is different, and you're not training the hardest part of the movement. And if you reset every time, you get more practice on first reps. Because if you do a full reset, every rep is basically a 1-rep set. You're just fatigued. So if you do triples with a full reset, you're actually doing 3 singles on the deadlift, because you're having to reset your feet, your hands, and do a full reset of your starting pattern again each time. So it actually is training the lift the same way you would do on a max in terms of the biomechanics involved. So you're more likely to get good carryover to your deadlift. It's going to teach you better form. It will ingrain the good habits that you need to actually pull heavy safely. And then we come back to that point of a lower injury rate, because that's a big part of it too. You're retraining yourself to do that correctly. You're not going to have problems of deviation in bar path, because that happens a lot of times too. If you're just tapping, you can't ensure an ideal bar path every time. You're more likely to put extra jarring on the spine just from the tapping. You're more likely to put more shear stress on the spine because you're not realigning everything into the best possible angles. So you're basically putting more wear and tear on your back. You're putting more wear and tear on your spine for no additional training effect. And that's kind of the point that we've got to come to with that. The people who are doing that, they need to understand you are not getting better stimulation from doing it. And the fact that people continue to gain muscle and strength while training it this way is because you're training the muscles. But they're not getting more training as a result of it. So yeah, you'll make progress doing it because you're training heavy still, right? And anytime you train heavy and you're able to recover from it, you're going to get bigger and stronger, right? You're going to adapt. You're still getting training stimulus, but you're doing so with a higher risk of injury, considerably higher risk. It's not just a little bit more, it's considerably higher. And you're doing so with additional axial loading that makes it harder to recover. So you're basically shooting yourself in the foot by doing this. It's not a good idea. You really shouldn't do it. And it doesn't matter that you see a handful of champions who do it. They're being successful not because of the specific thing that they are doing there. They're being successful in spite of it. Maybe they just have really good genetics. Maybe they're training really hard. Maybe they're on more drugs than the next guy. All right, those are other factors there. It's not that actual touch and go deadlift that's giving them the benefit. That's not the reason they're so good at the deadlift. If it happens to be one of these guys, it's because they do a lot of heavy deadlifting. But they're actually getting less specificity and they're getting more wear and tear on their spine by doing this. And it's just not ideal. It's not something you should be doing, and it's just definitely not something noobs should be in the habit of. And I know you'll see these same champions, but I get more overload. All right, again, that's kind of a myth. They might believe that. They might believe they're getting more overload, but biomechanically speaking, they're not. They're actually not doing any more work at the muscular level. They're not actually training harder by doing that. Just like you'll see the guys, you'll say the same thing. Well, I can get more reps with the slingshot with the heavy weight. Well, of course you can, because the slingshot's helping you out of the bottom. That doesn't mean the muscles, doesn't mean your pecs are working harder. The slingshot is doing the work. Tapping the barbell off the floor on a deadlift is like using a slingshot on the bench press. Not beneficial if you're a raw lifter. It's not really helping you as much as if you had done quality reps from a dead stop. It's not giving you as good of a response. And again, you're just putting wear and tear on things with no additional benefit. So there's actual no benefit to doing it. There's only negatives, but you can still get away with it. You can get away with it until you get hurt. Basically how it works. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.